Hey guys, tonight we settle into the cold, damp dark of a medieval cottage where your bed creaks like it's plotting against you. The air smells faintly of turnips, and sleep comes slow beneath itchy wool. There's no memory foam here, no blackout curtains or ASMR playlists, just lumpy straw, a tattered blanket, and a drafty wall that lets the breeze through like it pays rent. Outside, a dog howls in the distance. Or maybe it's your neighbor, you're not sure. You pull the covers tighter, hoping they haven't been colonized by a mouse. Welcome to medieval sleep. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all listen from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bed you lower yourself into isn't so much a mattress as a woven sack of straw, stuffed by hand and definitely not vacuum sealed. You try not to think about what's crawled through it. In a peasant home, the bed might be a family affair literally. Parents, kids, maybe even a goat if it's a cold night. Privacy is less of a thing, and dignity is mostly theoretical after you've shared a bed with your snoring uncle and his onion breath for 5 years. Clothes stay on. You don't want to wake up with frostbite. After all, homes aren't heated, and even castle walls, thick as they are, do little to keep the cold from breathing down your neck. If you're lucky, someone heated a brick in the hearth and slipped it under your feet before bed. If you're not, well, you become intimately familiar with the exact shape of your own toes at 3 a.m. The ceiling beams creak above you. That's either the wind or a rat party in full swing. You pull your cloak over your head and try to ignore the fact that the communal chamber pot is only a few feet away, and someone is definitely going to need it soon. Beds, for most people, were luxury items. If you had one at all, it was a sign you were doing okay, like a modern person owning both a fridge and a dishwasher. Wealthier folks had wooden frames with ropes crisscrossed beneath a feather mattress, giving us the phrase sleep tight. Spoiler, they didn't, because even the feather mattresses were stuffed with the kind of feathers that poke you in the kidneys just as you're dozing off. And of course, bugs, fleas, lice, and bed bugs were regular bedmates. Your average medieval sleeper developed an impressive tolerance for itching, and if you're lying there wondering whether you can catch leprosy from your blanket, congrats. You're now thinking like a 14th century serf. Historians still argue whether people simply endured this or whether they found clever hacks to make it tolerable. Some used herbs like lavender or mugwort under their pillows, hoping the scent would ward off both insects and bad dreams. Others hung cloth around their beds, part privacy curtain, part draft blocker, part mosquito net. Nobles made this a bit of a performance, draping their beds in layers of silk and embroidered linen. If you couldn't sleep in comfort, at least you could pretend you were dying stylishly. And about those dreams, you're not just hoping for rest, you're hoping for guidance. Dreams were taken seriously, seen as messages from God or premonitions of disaster. If you dreamed of your teeth falling out, better start digging a grave. If you dreamed of pigs dancing, well, that one probably meant you'd eaten something bad. Still, you might wake and recount your dreams at breakfast, like a medieval morning show last night. I dreamed I was flying over a burning cathedral. That's probably fine. You'd think sleep would be easy after a day of manual labor, hauling buckets, threshing grain, or, surviving dysentery. But no, because sleep wasn't just a nightly thing. It was a logistical negotiation, a matter of warmth, safety, and bugs per square inch. Getting 8 hours in one stretch, that's a modern fantasy. You'd more likely sleep for a few hours, wake for an hour or two, and then sleep again. But we'll get to that later. For now, you're trying to get comfortable on your pile of straw and wool, ignoring the fact that someone next to you is snoring like a broken bellows and that the wind sounds suspiciously like it's carrying voices. You close your eyes. The candle has long since guttered out. The fire in the hearth is just a few glowing coals, and the cold settles over the room like a particularly judgmental blanket. Somewhere in the dark, you hear a distant thud. You tell yourself it's just a log shifting. Definitely not a thief, or a ghost, or the neighbor's feral child. People in cities had it no easier, crammed into tiny rooms above noisy taverns or next to streets where nighttime laws tried and failed to stop drunken revelry. They fought for sleep between catcalls, cartwheels, and cats doing who knows what in the alleys. A wealthy merchant might pay extra for a quieter room. The rest of the city's population just got used to falling asleep to the lullaby of street fights and chamber pots being emptied with dramatic flair. And still, somehow, people managed. They slept, maybe not deeply, maybe not well, but enough to wake up and do it all over again, milking cows, dodging taxes, patching roofs, and praying for good weather. And maybe, if the night was quiet and the bed not too prickly, they even dreamed a little. You roll over, one more time, trying not to disturb the sleeping toddler, sharing your blanket. You think about the ceiling beam, the fire, the smell of herbs stuffed near the pillow, and finally, your mind drifts past the ache in your feet, past the buzzing in your ears, toward the quiet hush that comes, at last, with sleep. You don't stay asleep. Sometime after midnight, though you have no clock to confirm this, you stir, eyes half open, senses fuzzy, and yet unmistakably awake. Not just you, either. The entire household seems to rouse like it's all part of a rehearsed act. Someone mutters, someone else groans, a baby coos softly, probably about to decide it's morning. This is the first sleep, the initial stretch of rest that, in medieval times, was often followed by a waking period known charmingly as the watch. You didn't just collapse for a solid 8 hours. That idea wouldn't enter the mainstream for centuries. Instead, you slipped into a split sleep rhythm, one sleep before midnight, an hour or two of quiet wakefulness, then a second sleep until dawn. And so you lie there, drowsy but aware, staring up at the ceiling if you're lucky enough to have a ceiling and not just smoke-darkened rafters. Outside, the moon glows faintly through a window slit covered in oiled parchment. You hear the wind again, or is it the dog? During this watchful interlude, you might get up briefly, especially if you're nobility. There's a chamber pot to visit, a prayer to whisper, a sip of watered ale to take. Some people read, or wrote at least, if they could. A few even took this time for intimacy, which medieval manuals awkwardly suggested was healthiest between the first and second sleep, because nothing says romance like waking up next to a snoring husband with straw in his beard. For many, though, this middle-of-the-night wakefulness was spiritual, a time for quiet reflection, not idle fidgeting. You might recite psalms, not out loud, just enough for the words to drift around your brain like soft candlelight. In monasteries, this waking period was enforced. Monks rose from hard pallets to shuffle, barefoot and bleary, into the chapel for matins, the midnight prayer. It was cold. Of course, everything was cold, but it was also quiet, reverent, a sacred pause between dreams. Historians still argue whether this biphasic sleep was truly universal or just common in certain regions. Some argue that urban populations, those living among late-night noise and close-packed houses, may have been less likely to follow this pattern. Others claim it was simply the body's natural rhythm in a world unburdened by artificial light and Netflix-induced insomnia. And about that artificial light, you've got none. No bulbs, no LEDs, not even a decent candle unless you've got money to burn literally. Most peasants didn't light a candle just to walk across the room. If you rose in the night, you did so by fire glow or moonlight. A single tallow candle could cost more than a day's wages, so best not waste it on sleepwalking. And yet, even in darkness, The medieval mind made room for wonder. Wakeful dreams, they called them sometimes. That liminal zone where thought and vision blur. You lie there, drifting, not quite asleep, not quite awake, imagining angels in the rafters, or demons, possibly both. One might advise you to eat fewer onions. Occasionally, you'd tell someone about your nighttime musings at breakfast, maybe your neighbor, maybe a local wise woman. If what you saw seemed strange enough, if you described it well, someone might decide your vision was a divine message. Congratulations, you've become the medieval version of a podcast guest. Some people feared this watch period, though, especially in the darker corners of folk belief. It was when spirits roamed, when witches stirred their potions, when nightmares crept in. Not all dreams were welcome, and not all awakenings were gentle. If you sat up gasping from sleep, it might mean a night hag had visited, or worse, a loved one was dying far away. To protect yourself, you might hang herbs from the beams, rue, sage, garlic. You might sleep with iron under your pillow, or a blessed charm stitched into your tunic, anything to keep the spirits at bay, because sleep wasn't just about rest, it was about survival, not just from bandits or illness, but from things that went bump in the night, both imagined and not. You shift a little on your straw-stuffed mattress. The coals in the hearth glow faintly, casting shadows on the wall. Someone coughs, someone else rolls over and mutters in Latin, probably just dreaming of taxes. Wow, this first and second sleep pattern was so normalized that people wrote about it casually, like it was just how things worked. In a world before electricity and long before sleep clinics, people accepted that wakefulness in the night wasn't a problem. It was a pause, a moment to breathe, pray, or think about tomorrow's tasks, or to wonder what that noise was. Again, and when the time felt right, when your body sagged like over-kneaded dough, you'd drift back under, settling into second sleep. This stretch was often deeper, heavier, more dream-laced, or at least that's how many records describe it. If the first sleep was for recovery, the second was for mystery, and with any luck, fewer snores. You, still awake, stare at the darkness and try not to think about ghosts, or rats, or that weird noise the floorboards just made. You hear someone whisper a prayer, then nothing, just the soft, rhythmic inhale of sleep reclaiming its subjects. You let go of the last thread of thought, sink back into the straw, and fall again into dreams, asleep without clocks, without screens, without alarms, just the quiet rhythm of breath, the rise and fall of a timeless night. You wake with a start, not because of any particular noise, but because the sky outside has shifted ever so slightly. It's not quite dawn yet, but you know it's coming. The faintest blue tinge leaks into the edges of your world like a secret whispered too soon. Someone's already stirring in the next room. You hear the muffled thump of bare feet against earthen floorboards, and you realize, with the resigned sigh of the chronically under-rested, that second sleep is over. But don't worry, you've got another full day of tiredness ahead, because medieval people were, by and large, perpetually exhausted. Even with this two-part sleep routine, rest came in fits and scraps, always interrupted by cold, noise, hunger, childbirth, neighbors arguing about sheep, or the occasional fire. Your body never quite forgot how to ache. The morning routine begins not with a stretch and a cup of coffee, but with chores. So many chores. You rise in the cold, always the cold, and reach for whatever clothing you neatly folded last night. Just kidding, you slept in it. Most people did. Changing into sleepwear was not a widespread concept unless you were elite enough to own extra linen, maybe a nightcap if you were feeling fancy. Now, your first act of the day is to stumble toward the hearth and check the coals. If they've gone out, and you didn't bank them properly with ashes, that's on you. Better start praying for dry kindling. Lighting a fire from scratch wasn't just annoying, it was a serious pain. Sparks, flint, and frustration. And don't even think about using the neighbor's fire unless they like you. They probably don't. Once the hearth is gently revived, You take stock of the day's needs, bread to be made, water to haul, livestock to feed. Depending on your station, you might also check on a spouse, children, apprentices, or servants. Medieval households were often crowded, even chaotic, multi-generational, and multifunctional, with people coming and going at odd hours. Privacy was not a thing. If someone in your bed sneezed, you were all getting sick. The morning light creeps in, illuminating your one small window, or maybe your cloth-covered opening if you're less fortunate. You hear the cockerel crow, though he was probably at it long before this. Roosters don't care about your circadian rhythms. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly felt this constant fatigue or simply accepted it as part of life. After all, they didn't have the modern benchmarks for restful sleep or optimal health, but records suggest a low-level weariness threaded through most daily accounts. People worked hard, slept rough, and relied heavily on brief naps, especially during seasonal labor. You didn't really get me time. You got milk the goat or starve time. There were, of course, exceptions. If you lived in a monastery, your morning might begin with lauds, the dawn prayer. You'd gather in dim candlelight, voices weaving together in chants older than memory, a kind of spiritual caffeine. Monks didn't exactly enjoy luxurious sleep, but they did enjoy structured sleep, and sometimes, in a cold cell, that's all you can hope for. If you were a noble, you might spend your first moments wrapped in a fur-lined robe, gazing dramatically out a leaded glass window, or dictating the day's agenda to your steward while sipping watered wine. Still tired, though. All that plotting and poisoning takes a toll. Back in your imagined shoes, likely wooden and incredibly uncomfortable, you get moving. Breakfast isn't glamorous. If you're poor, it's yesterday's bread soaked in ale, with maybe a dab of rancid butter if fortune favors you. If you're richer, it's yesterday's bread, slightly fresher, with a slice of cold meat and some olives if you're Mediterranean and fancy. And, of course, there's the ale, always ale, not because you're trying to start your day buzzed, but because clean water is a gamble. Ale is weak, cheap, and safer. Think of it as medieval Pedialyte, only grainier. Now imagine this whole routine stretching out across seasons. Winter mornings, when your toes freeze to the floor and the sun rises late. Summer mornings, when light wakes you too early and the air already smells like sweat and hay. There's no such thing as a weekend, just saints' days and market days, both of which involve standing a lot and shouting. And despite all this, sleep remains elusive. Pregnant women sleep sitting up because lying down makes breathing harder. Farmers toss and turn on hay that pokes through the linen. Children wake crying. Dogs bark at shadows. Every creak of wood feels like an omen. It's no wonder, then, that sleep charms and remedies were common. People hung lavender, drank poppy teas, or whispered protection prayers before bed. If it worked, great. If not, well, there's always second sleep. One curious remedy involves sleeping with a piece of bread soaked in mother's milk beneath your pillow, supposed to chase away fevers and nightmares, or maybe just attract ants. Another suggested putting a Bible under your head to ward off dreams of sin. Hope you didn't have scoliosis. And of course, there was the ever-reliable sleep by exhaustion. Work until you drop, collapse, repeat. You yawn now, just thinking about it, which is oddly appropriate, because even as your medieval self plods toward the village green or heads into a dim workshop, a part of you is already counting the hours until nightfall. Not for fun, not for Netflix, but for that old familiar promised sleep. However brief, however broken, you glance at the sky, still only dawn, and somehow, already, you're tired again. You spend the morning moving from one task to another, a human version of a jug with a crack in it, constantly being emptied but rarely refilled. The sun's up now, higher in the sky, and the village is humming. Not bustling, not chirping, just humming, like a large, tired bee colony that knows winter is always coming. Around you, the soundscape is more than background noise. It's a sensory soup, a smith's hammer clanging from across the lane, the snort of an ox pulling a cart with an alarming creak, someone yelling about firewood again. The air carries a sharp scent, part dung, part smoke, part something stewing that's been stewing a little too long. You're already sore, of course. People didn't wait for old age to start hurting back. Then aching knees and cricked necks were the natural result of labor that began in childhood. Even children did their share. Your 10-year-old is probably picking nettles for soup or plucking feathers from a goose. No school, unless you count, don't touch that as a curriculum. Mid-morning brings the need for fuel. There's no snack drawer or coffee shop run. You might sneak a bite of cold barley mush, maybe a tough apple or half a boiled turnip. If you're lucky, the appetite never really goes away. It just flattens into a low hum of want. It's around this time that your fellow villagers start yawning in unison, not because they were up binge-watching medieval TikToks, because by late morning, the body remembers how little rest it actually got. The thing is, most people don't just feel tired. They look tired. Greasy hair, soot-smudged hands, clothes stained with time and broth. Bathing is a luxury, laundry even more so. It's a good day if you're not itchy. You notice a neighbor with red-rimmed eyes muttering under her breath. That's not unusual. Lots of people talk to themselves, or to saints, or to their dead husbands. Nobody really judges, because everyone is sleep-deprived, and sleep-deprived people are weird. Historians still argue whether people truly expected to feel well-rested, or if tiredness was just accepted as the baseline. Maybe it's like background noise, you don't hear it after a while. Chronic fatigue blends into the wallpaper, especially when you've never known anything else. One curious side effect of all this communal exhaustion, people got creative with where and when they grabbed a bit of shut-eye. Napping in church, for instance, was quite common. The drone of a priest's voice, the flicker of candlelight, the cool stone floor, it was practically designed for unplanned naps. One record from a small monastery describes a brother so notorious for falling asleep during matins that they gave him a stool with nails sticking up. Did it help? Not even a little. Farmhands napped in hay carts, children dozed during weaving, and even minor nobles sometimes fell asleep during long, boring court cases. Think of it as medieval power napping, though without the ergonomic support. There's a theory that this was less about laziness and more about biology. Some scholars believe the segmented sleep pattern made people naturally prone to late morning dips in energy, like you've just left your second wind back in bed. So you find yourself leaning against a barn wall just for a second, your eyes drifting closed, then someone shouts, and it's back to work, always back to work. By midday, the sun sits overhead like a bored landlord. It's lunchtime, sort of. Not a proper meal break, more like an edible intermission. Bread, again, cheese if it hasn't molded, a few spoonfuls of pottage, a kind of eternal stew that lives in a pot over the fire and absorbs whatever ingredients happen to stumble in. You've had better, but also worse. Sometimes there are bones. Now and then, you hear about someone, usually a monk or a very bored scholar, who's experimented with sleep schedules. One obscure record from the 13th century describes a recluse who tried to sleep for 4 hours, wake to pray for 2, nap for 1, read by candlelight for 1, then repeat. Did it work? Hard to say. The record cuts off abruptly, probably because he walked into a well, and yet the idea that humans aren't built for 8 hours straight of sleep is still floating around. Maybe the medieval body was more adaptable, or maybe it was just too exhausted to argue. You, on the other hand, are starting to feel the weight of the day settle in your muscles. It's not even mid-afternoon, and the promise of rest already feels like a distant mirage. Your only real hope that tonight won't be too cold, the dogs won't bark, the pigs won't get loose, and no one will knock on your door asking for your fire. You spot someone across the way, old Marjorie, bent nearly double, carrying a basket of onions like it weighs the world. She's muttering about dreams again, something about a golden goat and the Virgin Mary. Most people dismiss her, but you wonder. She sleeps in a loft above the bakery, next to the warm chimney. Maybe her dreams are warmer than yours. Another man is dozing in a cart, straw hat over his face, snoring softly while flies land on his boots. You envy him, truly, not for his cart or even his nap, but for the fact that no one is making him churn butter today. And then the bell rings in the church tower, a flat, heavy sound that says time marches on, whether you're ready or not. You blink against the sun and trudge back toward your next chore, whatever it may be. In this world, you're always mid-task, never quite done, and sleep is always something just out of reach. Still, you can't help but count the hours until the dark comes again. You're stirring a pot with one hand and swatting flies with the other. It's the sort of multitasking no one ever trained you for, and yet here you are, grumbling softly and trying not to let the barley burn. Afternoon has descended like a woolen cloak, warm in spots, itchy in others, and definitely weighing you down. The sun hasn't set, but already your body is doing its usual end-of-day negotiation. Should you rest now and risk missing something important, or keep going and collapse later in a pile of slightly damp straw? There's no consensus. You glance outside. The light has mellowed, all golden and soft, as though even the sun is getting tired. Chickens are already settling under hedges, heads tucked into feathers. A neighbor is yawning wide enough to catch flies. You yawn too, not because you need to, but because yawns are contagious across centuries. This is when many medieval folks started drifting into what they called first sleep. Not a nap exactly, and not a full night's slumber either, just a first try. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep was universal or just common in certain places. What we do know is that, for many, bedtime came not long after dusk, not out of some disciplined routine, but because candles were expensive, oil lamps smoked up the place, and staring into a dark wall is only fun for about 12 seconds. So you roll out your straw mattress, which has shifted into a vaguely lumpy pile of reeds and regrets formation, and you try to get comfortable, but it's never quite right. You hear a mouse skitter in the corner. The dog outside won't stop pacing. Your knees ache, and someone's baby is crying again through the thin timber wall. It's easier in winter. Oddly, long nights meant longer rests, at least in theory, but cold makes muscles clench and bladders rebel. Sometimes people slept next to livestock for warmth, which sounds cozy until you remember that livestock snore, kick, and occasionally smell like, well, livestock. Still, you manage to doze. This first sleep might last from early evening until just past midnight. You don't dream deeply, not at this stage, just fragmented images. Someone walking through snow, a bell ringing, the color blue but you can't place why. Then, like clockwork, you wake, not fully, but enough to know that the room's gone colder. The coals in the hearth have dimmed to an orange sigh. It's the middle of the night, but you're supposed to be awake for a little while. Anyway, this was the watching hour, a curious medieval intermission between sleep stages. Some people use this time to pray, others to tend to the fire or write in candlelight, assuming they could read. You, on the other hand, mostly just sit there, rubbing your neck and muttering about how it's too early to be up and too late to be useful. There are some fringe reports, fascinating ones, of folks using this time to visit neighbors or even gossip. One 15th century woman allegedly used this sleep gap to sneak off and steal eggs from a rival's coop. Justice was swift and yoky. Your body doesn't quite know what to do with this liminal hour. You nibble a crust of bread, maybe whisper a quiet hope to a patron saint, or maybe you just lie there, eyes open, tracing knots in the wooden beams overhead. The question of why this two-part sleep pattern existed still puzzles researchers. Was it biological, environmental, cultural? Did people truly find it restful? or just accept it as inevitable. You wonder, stretching your back slowly, whether modern people would survive it? Probably not. Imagine a millennial waking up at 1:00 a.m. and being told it's time for devotional journaling by candlelight. There'd be tweets, angry ones, you don't stay awake long. The second sleep drapes itself over you like a heavy blanket. This part tends to be deeper, more dream-filled, richer in REM cycles, though no one back then used that term. If your first sleep was for the body, the second sleep was for the soul. Some nights, people reported dreams so vivid they insisted they'd been sent by angels or demons or relatives with unfinished business. The lines blurred between the spiritual and the psychological. In an age without electric lights or binge-worthy series, dreams were the original night entertainment, and interpretation was a full-time hobby. Now and then, you're woken again, a drafty breeze sneaking through the thatch, a cough from a sick child, a rat that doesn't understand boundaries. But most nights, the second sleep carries you through to the first blush of dawn. When you rise, it's never exactly refreshed, but there's a kind of relief to having made it through another night without disaster, illness, or a roof leak. You stretch, crack your joints, mumble a prayer that your bread hasn't gone moldy overnight. By the time the rooster crows late, as always, you're already on your feet again. The first sleep is behind you, the second sleep a fading memory, and the long, aching day ahead is waiting with open arms. You rub your eyes, yawn one more time, and try to remember the dream that involved dancing goats and an upside-down church bell. It's already slipping away. But don't worry, you'll be back here tonight. Same straw mattress, same creaky beams, and maybe, just maybe, a little more sleep. You're up again. Not because you want to be, of course not, but because the world demands it. The second sleep has slipped through your fingers, and the early morning light is dragging itself in like a reluctant guest at a family dinner. Cold seeps into your bones before your feet even touch the floor, and already your thoughts are fogged with that familiar ache of unfinished rest. There's no snooze button here, just the faint warmth of last night's coals and the quiet creak of someone stirring next to you, or, in some households, the gentle kick of a child who's somehow turned sideways in their sleep and is now trying to occupy your entire side of the mattress. As you shuffle to relight the hearth, you can't help but think, why is it that, even after 2 sleeps, you still feel so tired? Historians still argue whether medieval people ever felt well rested, or if sleep was more a series of loosely connected naps held together by sheer willpower and wool blankets. The fragmented nature of their nights didn't always make for true restoration. It was more like taking little sips from a leaky cup. Outside, the village is still yawning itself awake. Smoke trails begin to twist from chimneys. A dog barks, probably at nothing, as is tradition. You pass by a neighbor gathering herbs. She gives you a nod that says, "We survived another night," which is basically the morning greeting in this era. You begin to notice the quirks of your community's collective fatigue. There's the miller who constantly rubs his eyes with flour-covered hands, making him look like a ghost with allergies, or the baker who forgets half his orders but remembers everyone's dreams, and old Edwin, who once fell asleep while walking and accidentally wandered into a duck pond. He didn't even wake up until the water hit his chin. That kind of exhaustion shapes everything. The way people move slower, a little hunched, the way they speak more muttering, fewer flourishes. Even the songs they sing while working lean into droning rhythms, like lullabies for grown-ups with too much to do. One curious detail that survived in records, people believe certain foods could help improve your sleep. Warm milk, of course, but also poppy seeds, lettuce boiled into mush, and a brew made from crushed fennel and honey. Whether any of it actually helped is unclear, but when you're desperate, you'll try anything. Even the medieval equivalent of sleepy time tea with a side of boiled spinach. You remember that story your aunt told, the one about the local friar who tried sleeping, standing up for spiritual reasons. He'd lean against a wooden frame and doze for minutes at a time, convinced it was the path to sainthood. He also developed a permanent tilt to the left, and once nodded off mid-sermon, "You're not trying that." But it wasn't just clergy getting creative. One fringe account from a rural convent tells of nuns who tied themselves to posts so they wouldn't fall during midnight prayers. Imagine waking up, tied to a support beam, in the dark, with Gregorian chants echoing around you. Now that's a vibe. As morning unfolds, you catch sight of a boy herding geese with one hand while rubbing sleep from his eyes with the other. He looks about as alert as a turnip. You wonder if he had his two sleeps or just one long wrestle with an itchy blanket and his snoring uncle. And yet, everyone gets through it. Mostly, you settle into your morning work. Maybe it's feeding livestock, collecting eggs, kneading dough. Whatever it is, your body moves before your mind is fully awake. Muscle memory takes over, and though your thoughts lag behind, some small part of you is already counting down the hours until rest returns. There's a moment, maybe mid-chore, when your hands are submerged in cold water or grain dust and time blurs. You blink slowly, and for a second, you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming. That's the toll of interrupted sleep. The boundary between waking and dreaming starts to fray. Your neighbor passes by and comments on the weather. You grunt something in return, maybe agreement, maybe just noise. He mentions that he's barely slept all week. His pigs have been unruly, he says, or haunted, possibly both. Either way, he hasn't had a proper second sleep in days. You nod. This is your version of small talk trading miseries over garden fences. You hear of a woman in a nearby village who swears by sleeping in a swing, not a playground swing. Mind you, more like a hanging cradle for grown-ups. Her theory is that the rocking keeps her dreams sweet and her demons confused. No one's quite sure if she's onto something or just eccentric. But hey, if it works, you take a break just as the church bells mark mid-morning. Not a long pause, just enough to stretch your arms, wipe sweat from your brow, and sigh dramatically into the breeze. The fatigue hasn't lessened, but you've made peace with it. Like a grumpy roommate who refuses to move out. So much of life here revolves around work and sleep, or the lack of it. Rest becomes a kind of fantasy, a thing you long for but rarely experience in full. And yet, somehow, you keep going because there's barley to thresh, firewood to chop, a chicken somewhere that refuses to stay in its pen. You push on, blinking hard to keep your focus, heart set on that moment, hours from now, when you'll lie down again and begin your nightly 2-act performance. First sleep, wakeful watch. Second sleep, a little dreaming, a lot of shivering, and maybe, if the gods are kind, no rats tonight. Lunch is more of a suggestion than an event. You nibble at something, maybe coarse bread, a hunk of cheese, a few foraged greens. The bread's a little stale, but it still works if you chew with determination. There's no feast, no clinking cutlery, and absolutely no dessert. The most indulgent thing on the table is probably the onion. You consider it a luxury item. You settle down in a patch of shade, half resting your back against the side of the house. It's just long enough to let your eyes blur the line between squinting and dozing. That middle of the day lull, you feel it thick in the air, like invisible fog. Historians still argue whether most medieval folk took formal midday naps, or if that was a privilege reserved for the better-fed, higher-born types. But from how your limbs hum with fatigue, it's hard to imagine not stealing a few minutes here and there. Sleep wasn't scheduled, it was scavenged. You yawn wide, stretching until your joints crack like old floorboards. Nearby, a younger child is snoring under a wheelbarrow. No one bothers him. In fact, you quietly envy him. That's the dream, unconscious by noon. Face smeared with berry juice, the very picture of rustic serenity. Still, the day doesn't pause just because you're tired. There are nettles to be pulled, buckets to be filled, neighbors to help. One of them needs assistance repairing a fence, which turns out to be less about fence posts and more about holding up the entire structure with sheer stubbornness. You give it your best shot anyway. Between hammer swings, your mind drifts not to grand ideas, but to oddly specific sleep fantasies, like lying in a bed made of feathers, or napping under a waterfall, or just going an entire night without being elbowed by a sheep. You're reminded of something you heard in the market once. A traveling scholar had brought news from a monastery in France where monks slept in shifts, each group rising to chant prayers, then rotating back to bed like tired cogs in a divine machine. The goal was to keep praise flowing 24/7, but it also created a bunch of half-asleep monks who, according to rumor, once started chanting in their sleep and accidentally praised a goat. Whether it's true or not, you like the image. And speaking of monks, there's a curious trend. They help spread segmented sleep as moral discipline. The idea was that sleep should be earned and not indulged. Too much rest, they claimed, made you spiritually sluggish. So, some monks would lie on wooden planks, or sleep sitting upright, or even wear itchy robes that ensured no snoozing went uninterrupted. You imagine trying that after a day of threshing barley. Pass. The sun inches higher, making your skin prickle. You shield your eyes and glance toward the nearby woods. Stories say there's a hermit living in there, an old man who claims he's trained himself to live on 1 hour of sleep a day, plus one potato and the occasional squirrel. People visit him with questions about dreams, hoping he's unlocked the secrets of rest. But most come back saying he just told them to stop thinking so much and sit under trees more. Not exactly scientific, but who are you to argue? You get back to work, but your pace slows. Everyone's pace does. Afternoon turns people into moving furniture, functional but not exactly graceful. A girl hauling water lets half of it slosh out and doesn't even care. Her mother sees it, shrugs, and says something about the gods needing a drink too. That's the level of tired we're dealing with here. To keep spirits up, you hum a little tune, nothing fancy, just something rhythmic. It's the same melody your grandfather used to sing, and probably his grandfather before that. The kind of song that doesn't need words, because it's more about staying awake than saying anything. You pause at the well, dipping the bucket slowly. A dragonfly skims the surface. For a moment, it all feels still, like time itself just took a long blink. That's when it hits you. This entire world runs on tired hope. People rise without enough sleep, labor all day, then lie down again, not knowing if the next night will bring true rest or just another round of waking watches, drafty walls, and creaky dreams. You meet an old woman who offers you a strange piece of wisdom. She swears that sleeping with a bowl of rosemary under your bed keeps nightmares away. Not under your pillow, mind you, under your bed specifically, and only if it's a Tuesday. You thank her and wonder whether rosemary's actual power lies in its smell or its ability to distract the brain with weird rules. Before you leave, she gives you a woven charm, all knots and bits of wool, for sleep, she says, or at least for fewer mice. Hard to say which is the priority. Evening's still far off, but the shadows grow longer. Your stomach starts to wonder when exactly dinner is happening. Your brain, on the other hand, wonders how it's supposed to keep functioning when all it wants is to lie down in a haystack and temporarily exit this reality. You think about that haystack, soft, dry, and smelling faintly of sun. Maybe you'll go there later, just for a few minutes, just to close your eyes. It's not indulgence, it's survival. Because if there's one universal truth in medieval life, it's that being tired is as normal as breathing. Rest is rare, but when it comes even in stolen handfuls, it feels like a blessing whispered by the stars. By now, your limbs ache in that satisfying, overused way, the kind of ache that settles into your bones like a familiar tenant and refuses to leave. The sun hasn't set yet, but already your body is negotiating if you keep going for just one more hour. maybe you'll earn the right to fall face first into a straw pile without consequence. Evening chores kick in. They're gentler than the midday ones, but no less vital. You check on the animals, all of whom are slightly better at managing sleep than you are. Chickens drowse in their coops like little feathered gods, their heads twitching on invisible dream axes. You envy their complete indifference. No bedtime rituals, no spiritual guilt, just instant poultry slumber. Your job now is to gather herbs, not the exciting, exotic kind from merchant stories, but your local favorites: lavender, mugwort, maybe some lemon balm if the goats haven't trampled it. You're not collecting them for cooking, you're making sleep bundles, the medieval equivalent of a lavender-scented candle and a desperate hope. People hang them by their beds, stuff them into pillows, or if they're truly committed, boil them into murky teas that smell like swamp hugs. Historians still argue whether these bundles actually worked or if they were just one more layer of bedtime folklore. Either way, it gives you something to do while the light fades. You bring your haul inside and find your neighbor there, already setting out the evening meal. Meal might be a generous term. It's mostly boiled root vegetables and whatever was left of that onion you thought you finished at lunch. But the pot is warm, the steam curls in the air like a sleepy ghost, and the bread has softened just enough to chew without wincing. You sit down cross-legged, and for a moment, you pretend you live in a world of abundance. Over dinner, conversation floats between gossip, prayers, and unverified sleep cures. One woman swears by rubbing her temples with garlic. Another claims she can only fall asleep if someone recites psalms backwards near her ear. And there's that one guy, every village has one, who insists he never needs more than 4 hours of sleep and spends the rest of the night praying, fixing tools, and judging the rest of you silently. A child pipes up to share the story of a local knight who once dozed off during a siege. According to her version, he was so exhausted that he slept through an entire wall breach, woke up mid-sword fight, and still managed to win, likely embellished. But the point sticks: everyone, from peasants to warriors, was sleep-deprived. It's around now that people start to stretch and groan and eye the sleeping spaces with increasing longing. You find your usual corner, nothing grand, just a space where your body fits without having to curl up like a snail. The floor is straw over packed dirt. There's a wool blanket if you're lucky, or an animal skin if you're really lucky, or just a shared body for warmth if you're being realistic. You lie down, but sleep doesn't come right away. The room is full of gentle noise, creaking wood, distant barking, a baby coughing in its sleep, someone muttering a bedtime prayer that sounds suspiciously like a grocery list. Above you, the roof leaks light through the thatch, and you track the moon's shape through those little holes like it's a secret calendar only you can read. You wonder, not for the first time, how nobles sleep. Do they have actual beds, feather pillows, someone whose only job is to heat stones and tuck them in beside your feet? It's a pleasant fantasy until you remember that even kings had to deal with rats and lice and the occasional assassin. So maybe not so different. Really just different bedposts. And speaking of fantasy, there's the whole idea of first and second sleep. You've heard about it. Of course, it's the way most folks seem to divide their nights. After the evening chores and dinner and gossip, you lie down for your first sleep, usually a few hours. Then you wake up somewhere around midnight, not fully alert, but lucid enough to stoke the fire, say a few prayers, or if you're lucky, enjoy a bit of gentle intimacy. Some even go visiting at this hour, wandering over to neighbors' homes like midnight socialites. And then comes the second sleep, which carries you through to dawn. Historians still argue whether this pattern was biological necessity, cultural tradition, or a mix of both. All you know is, it makes the night feel like 2 miniature days stitched together with dreams. Tonight, you're not quite sure if your body will cooperate. Some nights, you sleep through both shifts. Others, you wake with eyes wide open, convinced it's morning, only to find the moon laughing down at you like an old friend with a terrible sense of humor. You snuggle deeper into your blanket, if you can call this itchy, half-worn fabric a blanket, and try to relax. But relaxation isn't easy in a world without blackout curtains, melatonin, or the comforting glow of a phone screen telling you what time it is. Instead, you listen, not to music, but to the hum of medieval life winding down, the low murmur of two women sharing secrets, the rhythmic tapping of someone weaving wool even at this hour, and the occasional shriek from a fox that sounds like a banshee with performance anxiety. Still, the sounds don't scare you. They're familiar, like lullabies in an ancient tongue. You breathe in the scent of warm earth and dried herbs, and you feel yourself sinking. Maybe you'll wake in the middle of the night for that in-between moment, or maybe not. For now, all that matters is the brief, golden slip into the kind of rest you've spent the entire day earning. You wake, not to sunlight, but to a kind of stillness. The air has that middle-of-the-night chill, just enough to make you tug your scratchy blanket tighter. Around you, the room is dark, save for the faint flicker of embers in the hearth, glowing like sleepy fireflies tucked into ash. You've reached the mysterious territory known to medieval folks as the watch. This is the time between first and second sleep, a strange twilight zone where your mind drifts more freely. You're not fully awake, but not entirely asleep either. And in this liminal space, odd things tend to happen. For starters, it's prayer hour. The church didn't invent midnight devotion, but they certainly encouraged it. If you're particularly devout or just anxious about your eternal soul, you might mumble a few psalms in the dark. Monks in their cloisters are doing the same, their voices echoing off cold stone walls. Some people swear these moments are when the soul is closest to the divine. Others are just trying not to trip over the cat. There are other options too. Some use this hour for quiet intimacy. Scholars still debate whether the medieval watch boosted family bonding or simply led to an uptick in surprise pregnancies. Whatever the case, it wasn't unusual to roll over, poke your spouse, and say, "Well, we're up anyway." But you're not in the mood for prayer or pillow talk. You're curious. You get up and pad softly over the uneven floor, ducking past slumbering forms. Outside, the night feels different than it did at sunset, crisper, quieter, as if the world has exhaled and decided to keep still. You pass the animals again, cows twitching in their dreams, pigs snoring like distant thunder, and head toward the edge of the village. You're not alone. Across the way, an old woman stands in her doorway holding a lantern. She gives you a nod, like it's the most normal thing in the world to be out wandering at this hour. And in this world, it is. This time of night has a kind of magic to it. Not the spellbook kind, but the quiet sort, born of half-sleep and candlelight. People talk, secrets get shared, problems that seemed enormous at dinner shrink down to something manageable under the stars. There's even evidence, yes, the serious, dusty kind that doctors recommended using this period to reflect on your dreams, or even solve problems your waking mind couldn't crack. You can almost imagine medieval mathematicians lying in haylofts, solving algebra by moonlight. One man you pass is whittling by firelight. Another is sketching religious symbols on the ground with chalk, hoping to keep nightmares away. There's a woman who insists she only hears the voices of her ancestors between midnight and cockcrow. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were symbolic, sincere, or something murkier, perhaps closer to therapy, in an era with no word for it. You walk a little farther, past the baker's house. His shutters are open. Inside, he's already up, stoking the oven for the morning's loaves. You can smell the faintest trace of rising dough, yeasty, warm, alive. It's the scent of tomorrow creeping in early. He sees you and doesn't even blink, just goes on with his work. This is his first sleep's end. For him, day begins now. Back home, you climb under the blanket again, limbs a little stiffer from the cool air. Second sleep should come now. If your body cooperates, there's always the chance it won't. Some nights you lie there, wide-eyed, counting breaths instead of sheep. You're not alone. Sleep disorders weren't invented in the 21st century, even if they didn't have snazzy acronyms back then. To help, you remember the herb bundle? You reach for it, give it a squeeze, and inhale that odd, minty, lavender, earthy smell. It helps a little. You close your eyes and try to picture something peaceful, maybe that little pond near the edge of the woods, the one where the frogs sing like they've just discovered opera. The quiet of the village deepens, fewer footsteps now, fewer whispers. Most have returned to sleep. Only the occasional dog bark or owl hoot reminds you that the world hasn't frozen, just paused, like the in-between breath of something ancient. You try to empty your mind. No chores, no gossip, no worries about whether the Lord will raise taxes again next month. Just the gentle tick of your own heartbeat and the sound of your breath against the cold. Eventually, you feel your body shift again, heavier now, pulled downward like something made of stone and memory. Your mind drifts, dipping into dreams that aren't quite real, yet feel more vivid than your waking life. In this second sleep, the world reorganizes itself. Thoughts reweave, muscles repair. You are, for a few stolen hours, unbothered. Some scholars argue that this fragmented sleep, first and second, was healthier, more natural. They believe modern sleep cycles are artificial inventions, pressed into us by electric light and factory clocks. Others disagree, claiming it was simply necessity, not choice, that made people sleep this way. The fire went out, the room cooled, the animals stirred, and so they adapted. Whatever the truth, you don't worry about it now. Your thoughts sink beneath the surface, like a coin vanishing into water. You no longer feel the straw under you or the blanket across your chest. You've drifted off, not with a bang, but with a slow slide into dark comfort. And outside, the stars continue their quiet procession across the sky, keeping watch over a sleeping world that's never quite as asleep as it seems. By the time your second sleep begins to loosen its hold, the world outside is already stirring. A rooster crows somewhere, its voice cracking like a village teenager hitting the wrong note in church. The sky is still dim, the kind of blue that looks like someone spilled ink across the heavens but didn't bother to mop it up. But for medieval folks, this counts as morning. You stretch beneath your blanket, every joint chiming in like a creaky wooden chest. There's a layer of hay stuck to your leg. The hearth is cold again. Someone, probably the same poor soul every morning, is already outside clanging a pot to shoo birds off the grain storage. The first light of day is greeted not with meditation or mindfulness, but with chores. Medieval mornings weren't romantic. They were relentless. You rise because you must, not because you feel particularly enthusiastic about the idea of milking something that might kick you in the ribs. Still bleary-eyed, you stumble into your work. Maybe you live on a farm and need to tend to animals before breakfast. Maybe you're an apprentice and must sweep your master's workshop while dodging lectures about punctuality. Or maybe you're a woman of the household, juggling a mental list that includes stoke the fire, feed the kids, boil the laundry, not die. Breakfast is not so much a meal as it is a food-shaped apology for the early hour. A crust of bread, a smear of soft cheese, if you're lucky, a bit of ale to take the edge off the cold. Yes, people drank ale in the morning. Water wasn't always safe. And let's face it, a weak beer helps more than it hurts when the day's already full of manure, even with all the grogginess. There's a rhythm to these mornings. You hear it in the clatter of pails, the thud of boots in mud, the whinny of horses, the occasional curses muttered in Latin. Everyone is tired, but everyone is moving. In towns, bakeries come alive, chimneys smoke, market carts rattle across cobblestones. The church bell tolls a low note, calling people not just to prayer, but to consciousness. It's a communal alarm clock. And no, you can't hit snooze. Some folks light a bit of resin or incense to keep away the morning stench, which, by the way, is not some medieval myth. The combo of chamber pots, manure streets, and unwashed socks. That's very real. Still, there are small joys. The morning light glints on dew-drenched leaves. A neighbor offers you a plum, sticky and sweet. Someone tells a joke that doesn't quite land, but you laugh anyway because you need the breath. It's too early to be grumpy. And honestly, who has the energy? You might take a moment to splash your face with cold water. No fancy skincare routine, but it helps. There's a plant called betony that some folks swear keeps the mind sharp and the mood light. You rub a little on your temples, just in case. Scholars today still wonder whether medieval people were chronically exhausted or just used to it. The answer might be both. Sleep was interrupted, yes, but so was labor. You weren't expected to grind non-stop for 16 hours. There were pauses, a chat with the blacksmith, a midday nap under a tree, a lull in the afternoon when even the chickens look like they need coffee. And here's where things get oddly modern in some communities. People scheduled in little rest breaks on purpose. You'd be up before dawn, yes, but you'd also lie down after lunch for a siesta of sorts, though that's not what they called it. These small naps weren't laziness, they were strategy. Try plowing a field all day without one and see how long your spine lasts. Even the church calendar gave you breaks. With over 150 feast days in some regions, folks often had time off, not exactly vacation, but certainly a slowdown. You'd feast, pray, maybe even nap in the sun if the bishop wasn't watching too closely. You could say religion and sleep were low-key allies. Still, the pace picked up fast. By mid-morning, the streets are loud with business. You're trading wool, sharpening tools, haggling over onions. Even the town drunk has made an appearance and is arguing with a goose. That's a whole thing. And if you were a scholar or monk, your morning might start in the scriptorium, copying texts with frozen fingers and ink made from oak galls and iron salts. Not the worst job. Unless you sneezed mid-sentence, then it was back to the beginning. Those illuminated manuscripts didn't write themselves. Back in your world, the sun is fully up now. You've been awake for hours, but it feels like days. Still, something inside you clicks into gear. Your muscles remember their work. Your eyes adjust to the dust and light. You begin to feel, if not fully alert, then at least functional. A medieval version of caffeinated, minus the coffee. And so, you press on, because this is the rhythm of your life broken into pieces, wrapped in wool, warmed by small kindnesses, and punctuated by the steady march of bells. It's not glamorous, but it is, in its own worn-out way, beautiful. Midday arrives like a yawn you forgot to suppress. The sun has climbed high, and everything begins to hum with that particular drowsy energy, neither fully awake nor fully ready to stop. You blink against the brightness, your hands dusted with flour or soot or wool, depending on your trade. And though your body is in motion, your mind is slipping into that floaty space between effort and rest. For medieval folks, this part of the day carries its own rhythm, less frantic than dawn, less exhausted than evening. If you're lucky, it means dinner, which in medieval speak is actually lunch, the largest meal of the day, plopped right in the middle like a bookmark to hold the rest together. You sit wherever there's space on a bench, in the grass, maybe beside the hearth if you're indoors. A bowl of pottage steams gently in front of you, thick with whatever vegetables were in season, and possibly a scrap of meat if you're having a good year. Pottage, by the way, is like the medieval version of throw it in a pot and hope for the best. Peas, oats, onions, sometimes even a few hedgehog hairs if someone got distracted while prepping. There's bread too, usually coarse and dark, filled with bits of grit from the millstones. Not the romantic kind of whole grain this bread fights back. You've chipped a tooth on it before, and you'll probably do it again. Some meals are communal, eaten around a long table or a blanket in the courtyard. People talk in low voices, laughing with their mouths full. Others take theirs alone, chewing slowly while watching the chickens peck their way through yesterday's mistakes. If you're a noble, of course, this looks very different: silver plates, multiple courses, and someone on hand to refill your wine goblet when your royal wrist tires out. But for most, it's functional, humble, warm, and then comes the strange part. After the biggest meal of the day, many people didn't power through with gritty determination. No, they stopped. That's right. A medieval nap was a perfectly acceptable thing, especially in southern Europe. But even in parts of the north, it wasn't unusual to lie down after dinner for a short rest. It wasn't sloth, it was survival. Try digesting barley stew while chasing sheep. It doesn't end well. You find a quiet corner. Maybe it's under a tree, maybe it's in the hayloft, where it smells like warm straw and old goats. The sun spills in through the slats, striping the ground in golden bands. Someone hums softly nearby. A dog turns in a circle, curls up, and exhales in perfect peace. And you lie down too, right in your work clothes, boots and all. There's no such thing as pajamas in your world, just varying degrees of wool that itch in different ways. Your body settles, your breath slows, and for a few blissful moments, time lets go. Historians still argue whether this nap was common across all classes. Some believe it was a luxury only laborers and monks indulged in, while others think even townsfolk paused, especially in warm months when the heat made further work unbearable. What's clearer is that rest was structured differently. It wasn't about 8 hours at night. It was about stitching smaller, looser moments of sleep throughout the day, like patches on a quilt. Eventually, the sound of a cow bellowing or someone dropping a ladle wakes you. The nap is over. You don't feel fully restored, but you do feel less likely to tip into the well by accident. You stretch your arms and groan in that deep, contented way. Around you, others are stirring too, back to the loom, the forge, the field. And now comes the part of the day most people dread: the long slope of afternoon labor. The sun begins its descent, but not fast enough. You still have to finish carding the wool, or turning the soil, or writing out another chapter in a very boring book of saints' lives. If you're in a guild, this is when you teach apprentices or argue over whose cheese-making technique is more sanctified. If you're on a manor, you gather bundles of grain and hope your back doesn't scream too loudly. There are injuries, of course, slips, cuts, burns, but people just wrap a cloth around the wound, mumble a quick prayer to Saint Sebastian or whoever's on call, and keep going. It's also the time of day for gossip. Someone's chicken laid an egg shaped like a pear. The miller's son got stung by a bee and claimed it was divine punishment for skipping confession. You tuck these little stories away like pebbles in your pocket, useless but oddly comforting. And every now and then, something really strange happens. Maybe you see a procession of barefoot penitents pass by, smacking their backs with wooden paddles, or a traveling doctor offers a potion guaranteed to keep you awake for 3 days straight. It smells like vinegar and lies. Even in the tedium, the medieval world had its little bursts of mystery. By late afternoon, the shadows grow longer, and you feel that slow drain, the one that signals it's almost time to wind down. But not yet. First, you must finish your day's obligations, and then, maybe, just maybe, you'll get to sit still without someone handing you a bucket or asking you to fetch a goat. You glance up. The sky is streaked with color. You made it through another day. Just a few hours to go. You wipe your hands on your tunic, or what's left of it that isn't already stained with soot, sheep grease, or the tragic remains of your lunch. The sun is finally beginning to slip behind the distant hills, and the air takes on that cool, slightly wistful quality of early evening. A few swallows dip and dart above your head, insects rising lazily in the twilight. It's time for supper. If you're picturing a lavish spread, brace yourself. Supper is the underwhelming sequel to dinner, a smaller, simpler meal meant more to quiet the stomach than to impress the senses. A hunk of bread, a sliver of cheese, maybe some broth if you're fortunate. If you're very fortunate, there's ale. If not, it's weak ale, which honestly tastes like someone dropped barley into dishwater and called it a beverage. But it's warm, and in the dimming light, the steam curling from your wooden bowl has a certain hypnotic effect. The tired chatter around the fire helps too low, steady voices discussing the day's small dramas. Someone claims to have seen a glowing fox in the woods. Another insists their cousin's cow gave birth to twins and now produces milk that makes your dreams more vivid. No one quite believes it, but no one argues either. That's the charm of dusk. Then come the evening chores, because the day isn't quite done bullying you. You check the latch on the door, bring the goats in, cover the embers in the hearth. In town, you hear shutters being drawn close. In villages, people carry candles or rush to finish before the last light fades. One neighbor's candle has a wick that keeps sputtering like it's doing dramatic theater. She sighs and mumbles something about St. Jude. As you settle in for the night again, fully clothed and probably still wearing your shoes, you brace yourself for the medieval equivalent of Netflix and chill, which is, of course, telling stories by firelight. This is where the real magic of medieval evenings happens. Folks sit close, wrapped in cloaks or coarse blankets, leaning toward one another to swap tales that are half remembered, half invented. There are the usual favorites: the boy who turned into a hare after stepping on a church roof, the knight who fell in love with a swan, the nun who glowed in the dark for reasons no one can explain. You listen, eyelids heavy, while someone's grandfather, who may or may not be immortal at this point, recites a particularly long saga involving 3 monks, a cursed turnip, and a talking donkey. No one is quite sure of the plot, but the rhythm is soothing. You don't need sense, you need sound. There's laughter too, especially when the ale kicks in. Gentle teasing, silly word games, the occasional impromptu poem that rhymes goose with loose about 5 times in a row. Even in hardship, people find their way to humor. Historians still argue whether these storytelling evenings were more about moral instruction or simple entertainment. Some say they reinforce communal values and pass down oral history. Others think people just liked a good ghost story. Likely, it was both. At some point, the story's slow, the fire crackles louder than the voices. You realize you're no longer following the words, just the cadence. Someone yawns an epic, contagious yawn, and it sweeps across the room like a quiet wave. You try to resist. You fail. It's time to sleep. Again. But here's the thing you need to know about medieval sleep. It didn't look like ours. People didn't just lie down for 8 hours and wake up refreshed. They often slept in 2 separate chunks, first sleep and second sleep, with a waking period in between that could last an hour or more. So, you lie down, maybe it's on a straw mattress that crackles every time you move, or on a wooden platform with a sheepskin thrown over it. If you're particularly lucky or a monk, you might have your own little curtained-off area, but most share a sleeping space, huddled close for warmth. You drift into first sleep, and it's deep, the kind where your body gives up completely. You snore, you drool, you briefly forget what your name is. Medieval doctors thought this sleep phase was necessary to cool the humors and let the digestive fire burn evenly. No idea how true that is, but it sounds like the kind of thing someone says while lying flat on their back after 5 cups of ale. Then, after a few hours, maybe at midnight, maybe earlier, you wake up, not fully, but alert enough. And you're not alone. Others stir too, sitting up in the dark, quietly poking at the fire, whispering to each other, or murmuring a prayer. This in-between time had its own rhythms. Some used it to think, to reflect, to, let's just say, enjoy their marriage in polite terms. Others wrote in journals or read religious texts. You, tonight, just sit by the fire for a bit, cradling a warm stone wrapped in cloth against your chest. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. Eventually, Second sleep comes. It's lighter, filled with dreams, sometimes odd, sometimes prophetic, often completely nonsensical. You once dreamt that a wheel of cheese asked you to judge a pie-eating contest. You said yes. Of course. Why wouldn't you? You shift in your sleep as someone nearby mutters. Maybe they're dreaming of cheese too, and outside, the night stretches on. Dawn creeps in, not with a flourish, but like an awkward guest who doesn't knock. A pale, grayish light slides under the door, casting faint lines across the room where bodies stir like sacks of turnips. Someone coughs, another groans as their joints remember they're 42 years old in medieval time, which, let's be honest, is basically 97. You wake groggily from second sleep, that dreamy, half-hallucinatory realm you barely remember. You may have wrestled an angel, you may have been an eel, it's unclear, but now you're upright, rubbing your eyes, feeling the straw poking through your tunic. No alarm clocks here. Your wake-up calls are much more organic. Roosters crow, church bells toll if you're near a monastery, or maybe you're awakened by the ever-romantic aroma of wet wool, stale air, and someone nearby who's decided it's a fine time for morning garlic. You suppress a gag. Just another beautiful medieval sunrise. The first task is to relight the fire, assuming it didn't smolder out completely during the night. There's a moment of suspense as you blow on the embers. Will it catch? You have to hike over to the neighbor's hearth and beg a coal. Like a sad pyromaniac, fire was precious, and morning warmth was never guaranteed. Then comes the water haul. You trudge to the well or river with your buckets, avoiding eye contact with the chickens because they always look like they're judging you. The water is bracingly cold, as if it's offended you personally. You splash some on your face. You're awake now. Next, a breakfast that makes your late-night snack look luxurious. More bread, maybe yesterday's pottage, reheated if you manage that fire. Occasionally, an egg or a bit of salted fish. On feast days, the monastery bells might ring out and you'd get something exciting, like a second egg. But on most days, it's the same chew, swallow, pretend it doesn't taste like boiled sadness. Still, you eat quickly. There's work to be done. In towns, the streets come alive with creaking cartwheels and murmurs of market chatter. In villages, the rhythm is more pastoral, animal bells, clanging tools, the low murmur of voices over plows. Monasteries buzz with chants and quiet footfalls as monks prepare for morning prayers. No one dawdles. Morning hours are productive hours. If you're a craftsperson, you've already begun. The loom set, the forge warmed, the tools sharpened. If you're a farmer, you're out with the animals or scanning the sky for a hint of today's weather. You're not reading a forecast, you're sniffing the air, squinting at the clouds, and muttering things like, "Red sun this morning, shepherd's warning," which is about as scientific as reading soup bones. And if you're a noble, you might still be asleep. Honestly, nobles woke up later, had softer mattresses, and crucially, were not personally responsible for milking anything. Even so, everyone's day is structured by the bell, religious or not. The church bells mark time for the community prime. Terce, sext, nones. These intervals punctuate the day like invisible signposts. They're the medieval version of checking your phone for the time, except you can't snooze a bell. Historians still argue how rigidly ordinary folk adhered to these canonical hours. Monks, certainly. Town dwellers, maybe less so. Farmers likely ignored them altogether in favor of the sun and the needs of their livestock. In short, there was structure, but it bent around reality. And somewhere in all this, the effects of sleep, or the lack thereof, start to show. You feel it in the eyes that sting when the wind hits them, the yawn that keeps sneaking out, despite your best efforts, the way your body aches in quiet protest, especially if you're older or have been swinging a hammer since dawn. Medieval people, like you, lived with a constant, low-grade fatigue, not just from sleep interruption, but from physical labor, poor nutrition, and what modern folks might call stress, though they probably didn't have a word for it beyond life. But they adapted. You adapt. Naps were common and, frankly, necessary. The midday meal often came with a brief rest period. Think of it as the original siesta. You might stretch out in the shade, using your arm as a pillow, listening to the buzz of bees in the grass. Some towns even wrote midday rest into local custom, especially in Southern Europe. Not laziness, just survival. There's also a kind of camaraderie in shared exhaustion. Everyone's tired. Everyone's trudging through the same day. So you joke, you slap your friend on the back and pretend he's a horse. You invent a new nickname for the overly dramatic rooster. You sing badly while sweeping the steps, and someone joins in. Even worse, that's how people coped. One of the stranger things about medieval daily life was how fluid sleep seemed compared to now. It wasn't the rigid bedtime at 10, up at 6 structure of modern life. People nodded off in church pews, snoozed by the fire, dozed during sermons. Nobody judged. If you weren't snoring audibly, you were basically participating. Even in courtrooms or noble councils, there are records of people just drifting off. It was as if the culture understood that tiredness was baked into existence. And of course, let's not forget the remedies. There were sleep aids, though none of them were FDA approved. Lavender bundles under pillows, poppy seed cakes, a prayer muttered in the right rhythm. One odd recommendation was to rub goose fat on your temples. No confirmation whether it worked, but it certainly left an impression. You've tried a few. Lavender nice, poppy cakes delicious, but maybe too effective. Goose fat. You're still not ready to talk about that incident. Now, as the sun climbs higher and shadows shorten, you reach for your tools once more. The second round of work begins, and it feels like you just finished the first. The day stretches out ahead of you like a long road, and sleep sweet, uneven. Interrupted sleep feels a lifetime away. By mid-afternoon, the air has thickened with effort. Your hands are blistered, your back is complaining louder than a drunk friar, and your stomach is already whispering about dinner, even though lunch wasn't exactly a triumph. The sun has slipped into that lazy, golden position where it seems to mock you by moving slower than ever. You squint at it, wondering how it's still up there when your energy ran out hours ago. But you keep going, because in the medieval world, there's no clocking out. Tasks just taper off. There's always something else to be done, even when there isn't. Another pail to haul, another fence to mend, another sibling to scold for sleeping in the hay cart again. This part of the day tends to blend together, a soft loop of chores, chats, and small rituals. The local gossip swirls around as people pause at the well or the bakehouse. You hear about someone's goat that escaped into the priest's garden, or that Marta the spinster might finally be marrying that tanner with suspiciously clean fingernails. It's not TMZ, but it passes the time. Then, finally, the work begins to slow, shadows grow longer, the cows shuffle toward the barn, as if herded by the light itself. The chickens do their strange, jittery, pre-roosting dance, flapping and fussing like they're offended by their own feathers. And you gather your tools and trudge back home, smelling like a medieval casserole of sweat, dust, and something you can't quite identify. Home might be a timber-framed cottage with a low roof and a smoky hearth, or a single-room hut where 5 people and a goat all argue over blanket corners. Whatever it is, it's where the day slowly, gratefully exhales. Dinner is the same humble affair as breakfast and lunch. Some porridge, maybe root vegetables, bread if you've got it. Occasionally, there's meat, especially if someone nearby is good with a snare or unlucky with a chicken coop. Spices, not unless you're royalty or you've married into a merchant family. For most people, flavor is an optional luxury. You eat together, or at least near each other. Silence isn't awkward, it's normal. The fire crackles, someone hums, someone else snores in a corner. You scratch your ankles, which are somehow both damp and dusty. It's not glamorous, but there's a certain comfort in the rhythm of it. Afterward, if there's energy left, the evening might include storytelling. One person recounts a half-true tale about a knight who jousted a bear. Another swears they saw a will-o'-the-wisp near the marsh. It's hard to tell where fact ends and fiction begins, but nobody really minds. It's not about accuracy, it's about winding down. Historians still argue whether these evening tales serve more as entertainment or as moral lessons. Some say they were early teaching tools, sneakily embedding wisdom in tall tales. Others think they were just the medieval version of Netflix, complete with plot holes, recurring characters, and at least one you had to be there joke. If you're lucky, maybe a wandering bard drops by with a lute and a suspiciously well-fed dog. He sings about dragons and doomed love and saints with suspiciously excellent sword skills. The songs are catchy in a minor key way. You hum along, trying to remember the words, but even bards get tired, and soon everyone starts to drift. The fire burns lower, the shadows in the corners thicken, the air cools in that way it only does when your blanket is still slightly damp and someone's foot is already in your space. You prepare for sleep again, not in pajamas, but whatever tunic you didn't spill anything on at dinner. The mattress is the same scratchy straw, possibly shared with fleas who seem convinced you're their landlord. But there's something else happening now, something you've been waiting for, that moment just before sleep, when everything is finally quiet. No carts rattling, no bells tolling, no duties pressing down like a sack of potatoes on your spine. You lie still. You hear someone shifting nearby, your mother, your cousin, your neighbor's cousin. It doesn't matter. This is how people sleep now. Together, crowded, communal. Privacy is a fantasy, but comfort is in proximity. There's a stillness in the dark, a comfort in knowing you've made it through another day without getting trampled by a horse, fined for baking bread that's too small, or accidentally starting a witch rumor by sneezing at the wrong time. Success. And then, as your thoughts begin to blur, you remember something you'd heard earlier about segmented sleep. Yes, it's likely you'll wake again around midnight. Maybe you'll stoke the fire, check on the animals, or just lie there and wonder what the stars are doing. You might even pray or talk with the others. The in-between hours belong to the imagination, where dreams blend with waking thoughts and nothing quite makes sense. Some scholars believe this biphasic sleep pattern had mental health benefits, that the gap between sleeps allowed for reflection, intimacy, and a kind of lucid dreaming. Others argue it was simply a practical adaptation to poor insulation and early bedtimes. Either way, it's coming. You'll rise again in a few hours, but for now, you let yourself drift into the first sleep. There's no pillow, just folded cloth. No sound machine, just the crackle of the fire and the distant night noises, owls, wind, someone in the next bed talking to themselves again. You smile. At least they're consistent. Tomorrow will come, with its aches and chores and possibly another surprise goat incident. But right now, you have this. You've earned it. The night deepens, thick and velvet dark, wrapping around you like a second blanket that's thankfully not crawling with straw mites. For a while, all is still. You breathe, you twitch, you snore. Someone else snores louder. Maybe a child rolls over and kicks you in the knee without remorse. But the rhythm of sleep has claimed the house again until it doesn't. Because as expected, you wake up. Not fully, not abruptly. It's more like surfacing from a dream into another dream. Your eyes open to the orange glow of embers, pulsing like slow breath, and you realize it's somewhere around midnight. You've entered what modern researchers now call the first sleep, that naturally occurring segment of slumber common across pre-industrial societies, and you're in the space between it and the second. This pause is neither nuisance nor accident. It's just part of the deal. You sit up, scratch your ear, and stretch your sore legs, which seem determined to never forgive you for being born into this century. In this brief window, medieval folks did all sorts of things. Some said prayers called vigils, especially during Lent or on saints' feast days. Others, particularly among couples, whispered together under woolen covers. There are even records suggesting this period was considered prime time for intimacy. Historians still debate whether this midnight window truly fostered closeness, or if it was simply when people weren't so tired they could form a sentence without drooling. You might also rise to poke the fire, check on the animals, or pace a little to ease your aching limbs. It's not uncommon for you to sit on a stool near the hearth and think, really think, about God, about whether your plowshare is rusting, about that weird rash on your uncle's foot. The things you don't have time to ponder in daylight bubble up now in the quiet. And the dreams, this fragmented sleep seems to inspire, especially vivid ones. You recall a dream about a talking pig with your aunt's voice, or maybe you dreamed of feasting on goose thighs in a great hall, even though you've never actually seen a goose that wasn't running away from someone. Dreams in this middle of the night period feel different, thicker, stranger, harder to explain. Some thinkers of the time believed dreams in this in-between phase were messages from the divine. Others suspected they were caused by humoral imbalances or bad cheese. As usual, no one agrees. The medieval brain, much like yours right now, was both curious and very, very tired. After an hour or two, you yawn again, your limbs grow heavier. The fire's down to its last heartbeat. You lie back down. The second sleep slips over you like dusk returning. And unlike your first round of slumber, this one feels deeper, quieter, less interrupted by the snuffling noises of family members or the weird gurgle from the thatch above. You sleep until the faintest hint of light presses against the cracks in the shuttered window. Dawn again, time to rise. You don't spring out of bed like a Disney character. You grunt, stretch, and negotiate with your back for basic cooperation. Someone else groans beside you. Another mutters something about a dream involving bees and St. Bridget. The rooster has already crowed late, probably on purpose. You splash your face with water that's colder than betrayal. You chew on whatever's left from the larder, more barley mush, maybe dried peas if you're feeling fancy. Your teeth hurt, your fingers are swollen from yesterday's work, and your socks haven't been dry since last Michaelmas. And yet, you carry on. The sad truth of medieval sleep isn't that people were miserable, it's that they were tired and somehow still functioning, despite drafty homes, shared beds, labor that should have broken their spines, and diets that would make modern nutritionists cry. People endured, and not just endured. They sang, they joked, they dreamed both in sleep and in waking, even in exhaustion. There was wonder, and that somehow is comforting, because sleep has always been a strange thing. It's never just rest. It's reflection, survival, escape, and occasionally a chance to talk to a vision of St. Agnes holding a turnip. Modern life might offer us memory foam and blackout curtains, but it also robs us of the slowness, the softness, the built-in lullabies of a world that didn't run on LED lights and cortisol. Tonight, you walked through that older rhythm, felt the calluses, heard the gossip, listened to the dark hum of a world before clocks, and now, finally, you're allowed to let go of it. Let it dissolve into the hush of your own room, your own time, your own dreams, and so, here you are, not trudging through muddy fields or jostling for space on a straw mattress, but nestled in your own quiet corner of the world. The story has drifted into silence now. The people, the sounds, the strange sleep rituals, they're all folding away like fog at sunrise. You can still feel the warmth of the hearth on your cheeks, hear the soft creak of a timbered roof above you, but it's distant now, fading gently. Your breathing slows. The room around you is still. There's nothing left to do, nowhere to be. just the soft rhythm of your breath and the steady beat of your own heart, each one softer than the last. You followed the winding path through a day long past, and now you've earned your own night of peace. The weight of those medieval burdens doesn't belong to you. You can leave them here. Let the fields rest. Let the bells go unanswered. Let the second sleep take you, not out of necessity, but as a gift, a pause, a drift into comfort. Maybe your dreams will carry a bit of the past, with them an echo of bells, a flicker of firelight, a goose with attitude, or maybe they'll just carry you somewhere soft and quiet, with no chores at all. Either way, you're safe now. The day is done. The past is quiet. Sleep well.